Hello, you're watching Spirit of Life. I'm Norm Currie and I'm your host for this episode, and we'll be focusing on the movement of love in our lives. Today we're speaking with Gordon Preece, and Gordon's an Anglican minister, chairman of the Anglican Social Responsibility Committee, director of the Ethos Centre for Christianity and Society, and a senior policy advisor for Catholic Social Services in Victoria. Pretty impressive, huh? Thanks for coming in, Gordon.
Pleasure, no?
I think something which could fulfill us straight off will be to talk about Ethos itself, because it's quite a significant organisation. So could you give us a bit of an outline of Ethos and your involvement with it?
Yeah, well, in some ways we're small, but we punch above our weight, I think, and that really comes out of a real sense of community and people who are really committed to, well, ethos means a character.
Yes.
And so it's a commitment to not just individual character, and we're a Christian organisation, so for us Christ is the embodiment of that.
Yes.
But also institutional character.
Yes.
So in this issue of our ZAK magazine on financial follies,
Yes.
we looked at, I wrote something on the AMP Society,
Yeah.
and the changes in that from a bunch of Congregationalists who were focused on mutuality in that kind of way.
Yes.
And then that leads into insurance, and was very, very Christian for a long, long time. Then in the 90s,
right.
the most recent 90s,
Yes.
basically it all sort of went privatised, very kind of bit like Margaret Thatcher. There's no such thing as society.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's the kind of thing we look at. What kind of nation do we want to be?
Yeah.
For instance. All of those kinds of aspects of character and ethos. You've said you talked about some people doing stuff, businesses and that, and some starting with prayer or
Yes.
that have a certain spirit or culture about them.
Right.
That's the kind of thing, and so we do that online. We do it for print, and people have to pay for the print ones, but yeah, that's some of what we do. We have a Faith and Work Award every year. And we've got that coming up on the 6th of May with Jenny George, who runs Converge.
Yes.
On doing good and doing well through business.
Yes.
So yes, if you're doing the right thing, it doesn't mean you'll always prosper and make massive profits or whatever, but you will generally do reasonably well.
Yeah.
Yes.
By having that ethos operating.
Yeah.
Is it a membership organisation? How's it operate?
Yeah. So it's run on members who they pay about $300 a year. They get all the publications, but there's obviously a chunk there that's a donation.
Yes.
To help us, and and also the Evangelical Alliance. It has an insurance company that basically helps people and helps them deal with things like COVID and all sorts of things. For mission agencies, for instance, and they usually make a certain amount each year, and some of that comes through to us, for which we're very, very grateful. So,
you mentioned publications, ZADOCs there. What other publications do you do?
This one here is called Equip. So that's not quite as heady, if you like, as ZADOC. And it's more for local churches who are trying to reach out to their community. So this one's beyond the bucket list, aging gracefully.
Yes.
And guy sort of sitting there, with his pipe in his mouth, and basically helping people to think how they can still love and serve, and during their retirement years, etc., etc. And I think we've realised with COVID, etc., just the vulnerabilities of those who are aged, and particularly when they're isolated.
Yes.
And when we've seen that, there's been a lot of heartache about that. So trying to address those sorts of issues.
So you have a committee, or is it how?
Yeah, we have a board,
right. Right.
And we're part of what's called the EA family. So there's TIER, which is a development fund.
Yeah.
What was Christian Management Association, CMA. I've forgotten the new version of that. There's insurance and there's Missions Interlink.
Right.
And so, we kind of catch up with each other. We have a kind of a broad agreement with each other. And when you look at the whole lot, it covers a fair bit. And
well, so that's a fairly solid movement involved there, and I'm just looking through this is directly from your webpage actually. So
it's been redone, by the way.
Oh, has it? So it's your old webpage.
It's in process.
But ethos, it's a statement of faith, and it's quite powerful. But one of the objectives of our interviews in this part of the programs is to follow through the extent to which the visible basis on which things are being done is in fact love itself. And I use that extreme word, which is difficult to define, as unconditional love, but let's just leave it at love itself. And with your statement of faith, first of all, how does this come together? You'd be familiar with it. Just to give you a look at it, just in case you're not.
Yeah, but, thanks. I think it's it's based, I guess, on the Nicene Creed. It's a fairly broad kind of statement. It doesn't go into too much detail because if you like, we like to have a strong centre, but dotted lines around the edges, if you like.
Yes.
Rather than heavy boundaries.
Yes.
And so this is designed as something that helps us with a sense of what that centre is.
Yes.
God as love, and Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, expressed perfectly, ultimately in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, etc., etc.
And I think Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is a good time to go to the break. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Spirit of Life, and we're speaking with Gordon Preece. Gordon, we're actually talking about the statement of faith for ethos because it draws out the fact that love is the power of the Christian love, the Christian power of the Spirit, Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, all of that. This statement of faith, where does it turn up? Now, the purpose of this question is to examine the presence of love, like when you're meeting, for example, you have a meeting of your directors, etc.
Yep.
Do you start that meeting with an allusion to this? And this is not a trick question.
Yeah. Not particularly, to be honest. We'd start with prayer. And that would be in the name of Christ and the Father, Son, and Spirit, in that sense, and sometimes we'd have an acknowledgement of country and Indigenous people, but Indigenous issues is one of the issues that we feel strongly about, and we try and support various Indigenous organisations. Common Grace is one of those. Yep. That you could say is maybe a kind of partner, informal partner.
Okay.
So I think, but I think that kind of spelling out of the nature of God as love that runs through the whole of life and influences our social justice work, etc. Like, you're dealing with one person, you talk about love. Well, dealing with two people, you're talking about justice in a sense.
That's right.
But it's kind of like, well, how much love to this one or how much love to that one? And so it can get complicated, but we try and work that out, in terms of the ethos or character of individuals, Christian communities, wider communities and institutions.
No, thanks for that. And clearly, it's a practical issue. It's not something you can't keep doing it over and over. It's not a repetitive issue. It's actually an issue of just how close, when you turn to look, how often do you see this as being the principle that sits, because it's a statement of your faith. It's sort of where the ethos is going. Yeah,
it's not meant as an. I feel like it's aspirational rather than being something that's trying to exclude.
Yeah.
And so I just wrote up about, we need some new board members and that. And just today I've written up about they need to be people who are committed to our perspectives on public life, professional life, and personal life, and the links in an everyday theology.
Yes.
About those sorts of things, and that they would be able to say yes largely to that broad sort of creed that's there. It's not trying to make particular denominational kind of detailed things which can lead you down a rabbit hole, to be honest.
Absolutely. I think more generic the better. But you just mentioned, conscience, what did you call it, the Aboriginal thing, community grace, was it?
Common grace.
Common grace.
Yep.
That's struck a flag of interest. How does that operate? What do you do with this?
Oh, well, that's an independent organisation, although their leader, I think, is on one of the boards for EAF. Brooke Prentice is her name, who's a very impressive young Aboriginal woman, and they recently put on. They have a service that's really addressing the issues of the heart and how to get back to changing the heart of Australia as a nation.
Oh, really? Right.
And in the light of Indigenous ownership and history and all of that, and they do that in a very reconciling kind of way.
And well, see, this is an example, isn't it, of ethos being interfacing with a group like that. That's extending this statement of faith between these two organisations, because it seems that they pursue it from a similar perspective. It sounds very conciliatory and joining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they have a particularly strong emphasis on ecological issues as well, and that's another issue that we've been quite strong on, and trying to help people think through, well, what are the implications if God is a creator? We can't just go around trashing the world or be indifferent to other creatures.
No, that's right.
And humans are creatures, and there's some kind of, St. Francis sort of said, brother, sister, etc., in relationship to the birds, the animals, etc. So how do we reflect on that? And these days there's a lot of more urgency about that.
Yes, there certainly is, and a lot of your publications, I think. Excuse me while I flick through to. So engage.mail. Mm-hmm. And now that's an online resource. And how does that operate? It's
well, people can just, if they just go to www.ethos.org.au, they can stick their name down and get that emailed out about once a month for free, and that deals with a range of ethical issues, but also the character behind those. We're not just looking at dilemmas.
No.
We're wanting to look at the ongoing, stable and chronic issues in some ways, for which you need a stable sense of who you are as a person or as an institution. And we're trying to provide a spirituality to sustain people in that. How do you hang in for the long haul when things are often feeling pretty depressing about climate change, for instance?
Yes. And when you look through some of the topics that you have put out on engage.mail, they are that way directed to about vaccine hesitant people, for example, which is a big community issue. But time is also a big community issue, and we're just about to run out of it. So, we'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Spirit of Life, and we're speaking with Gordon Preece. Yes, Gordon, we've been touching along as we go along with actually the role of love at different levels. A while ago, you were telling me a story about someone. Was it an op shop who they?
Yeah, at the church that I go to.
Oh yeah,
It's a relatively small Anglican church, which the op shop helps sustain it. But that's not the only thing it's there for. It's to really connect with the community, and people come in regularly. And anyway, one of the members of the congregation was giving a report at the AGM, and the highlight of that meeting, it wasn't just, sometimes people think of AGMs as fairly boring, but she was in tears when she talked about the 30 years that she's had working there, and the love that she's experienced.
Yes.
And also, I don't think she's said this, but that she is given as well. She really runs it now, and it was deeply moving, and it kind of summed up the ethos and the character of our congregation and that particular part of its mission through the op shop, in reaching out to needy people.
Yes.
And it was wonderful, really. It said something deep about the character of who we are as a congregation, and wanting to reach out, as well as reaching out to people who can't speak English, through English classes and other things like that. And we have quite a number of people from the subcontinent and Iran, and people who are refugees, etc.
Yes.
So that's another kind of aspect of that. And and they're, in addition to that, they're the sorts of things that Ethos would be committed to in terms of trying to think issues like refugees through and the Social Responsibilities Committee. Like, we march at the Palm Sunday March.
Yes.
We wrote something recently about, comparing the Djokovic situation and the people who are actually in the Park Hotel, which is where we ended up the Palm Sunday March last year. Yeah. And you could just see the lights from their flashing mobile phones just in this very dark sort of building. And we weren't able to communicate them with any other way, but so we sang songs, etc., trying to support them, and trying to get that bigger perspective behind, say, the Djokovic issue, that these people have been there for, in some cases, 9 years.
There are no words to describe it. It's just appalling. But but what's coming through this is the constant presence of ethos in its various forms, and prepared to be present as love. And that's like that woman's example, and I think those examples are everywhere of this interface of love between organisations. Now, I don't want to preempt anything, because next week we're going to talk about your recent book, which actually speaks about the ways in which that might well be our salvation from the new world. So we'll talk about that when we get there. Now, so that's your. You then have the Ethos blog, which is what blogs are, covering all sorts of things. So when you with the blog, who manages that? If you've got some?
A guy who's associate director with me, Dr. Armand Kavian. Yeah. And so he's Armenian Australian. Yeah. And has a doctorate in genocide studies from Sydney University, and he is a great editor. Yes, he would. And much better with social media and technology than I am. And so Armand really runs that. Yes. And keeps that ticking. And he's he's a very hands-on kind of personal kind of editor. We get a lot of people commenting about how good he is to work with, because people, all authors can get a little bit precious about their writing sometimes.
Yes.
But he's very respectful about that. But he'll be firm when something needs to change.
Yeah, and hold it together. And this whole electronic interface with information, it's the way that information is communicated nowadays. But it's important to have someone with that competence, isn't it, to be able to make it a real experience for people. Yeah.
You need someone who's very competent in that, especially if he's working with a digital dinosaur like myself. But we recently we've introduced something. Partly came out of COVID, and partly because we weren't able to have other meetings with people and even with ourselves.
Yeah.
And what we came up with was ZAK Zooms. I can't overlook an alliteration. And we had the first one on aged care.
Yeah.
And it went really well. And we had various authors who are people working in aged care, etc., and people who have a real vision and understand the whole industry is not quite the word I'd want to use, but the whole sector.
Yes.
And it was very good, and ended up talking about, well, what different forms are there for housing people and making a sense of home for people, the people who are still living in their homes, for instance.
Yeah.
But the people who are also in aged care, and how do we think through those kinds of things? And there are a lot of people who had been quite adventurous in the group that was online about how they actually handled those things themselves, and in other cultures as well, like Italians, for instance.
Yes, because there's plenty of precedent. They may not have been refugees, but they were economic refugees, and we've got a long history of it in Australia.
Yep.
So just we're going to run out of time really quickly, so I'm not going to ask the next question. Would you be available next week? We will come back and we'll discuss. Could you just pass me your book there? We'll discuss transforming vacation, which is I've skimmed through it, so we should have an interesting conversation.
So I'm just one contributor to it, but
nonetheless,
it's a very good book.
Terrific, no problems. You've been watching Spirit of Life, and we will be back next week. We'll be speaking with Preece again. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.